Whispering Woods is flying high with the success of both the petting zoo and Predator Ridge. The team is more tight-knit than ever, with Genevieve Joyce at the head of the operation. Attempting to stay true to her grandmother Vivian's plans, she wants to continue rescuing animals and providing them with a safe space here at the Haven. The tight-knit staff is supportive of this plan. Jonathan Vaughn, Imogen Chen, Antonio Garcia, Wesley Parsons, Anna Kingston, Charlotte Baker, and Arthur Joyce being the heads of their departments. The zoo's rising reputation and educational focus has caught the eyes and ears of many organizations, including one in Nepal. With the recent sighting of a Pallas cat near Mount Everest, the exotic pet and fur trades of Asia have suddenly gone into a frenzy. The rescue's representative, Sabina Maharjan, contacts the zoo looking for a safe place for a pair of these wildcats, and it looks like she might be in luck. Welcome back to Whispering Woods Wildlife Haven. Hey everyone, Spur here, and welcome to Season 2. We'll be starting work on this back corner with the Little Asia section. As you heard, our first animal will be the Pallas cat, a recent addition thanks to the Zookeeper Animal Pack. But we also need to give this area some TLC before we get to that. So we'll actually be starting with a retaining wall that is going to go behind this planter that separates the Predator Ridge area from the Little Asia area. Behind the corrugated barrier, you can see just the tip of the Wolverine enclosure. So this retaining wall is going to make sure that that planter is not sliding down into the Little Asia section, and it will also make for a nice backdrop for some of the enclosures that will be along this side of the section. I ended up using the painted temple stone pieces. I believe they came with the South America pack. And I don't think I've ever used these pieces before, but they did work really, really well. And once I've recolored them to this sort of beige color, I lined them up along that planter that you can see there. On to the entrance gate into this section. I'm using a lot of the Indonesian temple stone, and then we'll also be using a lot of the mossy stone pieces and a little bit of the decorative gilded pieces as well. Now I know these pieces are Indonesian technically, but because we don't have anything that's Himalayan in the game, they were a pretty decent stand-in. I did do a Google search for a Himalayan gate, and what you're seeing here is basically just a mishmash of a bunch of different images that I saw. Many of them just had the pillars on the side and then stone across the top, as well as some colorful decorative pieces like we see here lining the actual entrance. So I'm doing my best with the pieces that we have in game. Up top, there's usually a central piece like this one on the gates, so we're going to build that out of the mossy stones as well. And then we're going to make it even taller with this centerpiece. And then I ended up using some of these cornerstones, I believe they are. But yes, so just to make sure that that blends nicely into the pedestal that it is sitting on top of. This area, it's called Little Asia, and because of that, I wanted to make sure that many different styles from Asia were represented. When we think about an Asian section in a zoo, it's usually themed around Chinese architecture or Japanese architecture, but really, Asia has so many different styles of architecture. And so that's what we're going to be trying to do with this one here. So we have our Himalayan influence right here in the gate. Moving on to the pathing, I'm going to have a central plaza right in front of the entrance. We'll be working on that later in the video. And then I'm going to take my path around to where the Pallas cat is going to be. And then past that, we're going to have the Markhor and Takin enclosure, a staff area along the way at some point. And then we're going to have the Lar gibbon, the Asian small-clawed otter, the red panda, and the Asian water monitor, as well as the binturong in this section. Let me know what you think of the animal list, or if you think I should add some other animals to this section as well. Now that we've got our layout planned, here is Antonio on his way to research the new Zookeeper pack. I was looking for these pieces and I couldn't find them, and it took me way too long to realize that he had to research them for me to find them. So now that those have been unlocked, I'm going to be using this new metal cable piece. Can't believe how long it took to get a steel wire lookalike. And then the ball joint and this little hat piece at the bottom actually reminds me of the tokens that you would have in Monopoly as like your player token. It kind of reminds me of like the top hat that you would have in Monopoly. As for the mesh, we're going to use the Oceanian netting, and this is all recolored to a gray to make it look like it is just steel wires and cables. Don't worry about this top overhang here. I actually ended up changing my mind about the top of the enclosure. So once we have that, we'll just set it up along the edge. And then the back part of the habitat is going to be made up of the painted temple stones once more, but we're going to stagger them a little so that it looks more mountainous. As for the building in this enclosure, this is inspired by noir style architecture, which is an indigenous style of architecture in the Kathmandu Valley in Nepal. So it's usually designed on a rectangular plan and multiple stories high, so that lower story there is going to be a small rest area for the hoofstock that will be next door. I had to really play around with that to make it work because I totally didn't think about how the null barriers would go. But noir style architecture is characterized by courtyards and open spaces. You'll usually have a very symmetrical buildings and an overhanging roof and intricately carved windows. So I'm breaking a few rules of that here to fit this space, but I think it turned out quite nice, especially now that the null barriers are actually working. Sometimes you gotta go from one side because the other one's not working. At the back, I'm going to hide the log wall in the rocks. I just decided to put it here because otherwise our guests will be trying to view the animals through the rocks because there's a null barrier there. So we have to make sure it's an opaque barrier so that they're not trying to view the animals from a place they're not supposed to. As for the building, we're going to add a bunch of trim. Again, that intricately carved look. And these are the windows. I am using a lot of pieces from the Indian theme, which is base game, but a lot of this architecture would have been inspired by Indian architecture anyway, so it is quite fitting. For the roof, some painted tile. We're going to make this nice and dark later. And there's that roof overhang. I'm also going to put this in a separate group so that I can get an overhang on this edge of the roof as well. For the doorway, I'm just using some panels, trying to line it up. And now that we have our first Pallas cat in the enclosure, we're just going to double check that they can in fact get into the indoor area. For the interior, I'm using a bunch of gutter pieces to create the walls. So I have the round gutter piece from the conservation pack on the side, that's that darker piece. And then I'm just using the rectangular gutters to create sort of a frame for the mesh. I didn't realize how much I like these pieces. I actually kind of like the plasticky look that they give to this backstage area. Everything doesn't need to be metal. They're probably trying to cut some costs with some plastic. And then once that's lined up, we're going to move on to the front of the building where I'm going to be putting a bunch of ivy down. I'm so glad that this is a plant that the Pallas cats like, because there's nothing worse than playing challenge or franchise mode and realizing that the animals hate ivy, which doesn't make sense because ivy grows like literally everywhere. So anyway, now that we have some rocks in, we're going to hide the food plate in there. This enclosure is going to have a lot of dead trees. I believe the Pallas cats can actually climb that tree. I'm not sure why, because they climb rocks very frequently, but not necessarily trees. And as you saw there, I had a little plant palette for the undergrowth. Lots of saltwort and nettles, and this plant, the Buddleia, is actually a very good stand-in if you feel like the nettles are slightly too bright, because they kind of have that weedy look as well. Now we have some faux rocks. The big rocks in the enclosure are tundra, so they are a little bit darker. These ones are the taiga coloration. I just felt the tundra coloration was a little bit too dark, so we'll sink those down into the ground. And now that the interior of the enclosure is done, we're going to take care of the exterior. Here, this is the moss decal, which I've recolored to look like dirt, and we're just going to line the edges of the path with that to make it blend in. And we're going to create a small guest fence. So the rope coils are the new ones from the Zookeeper pack, the marquee rope coils. And this is just the painted bamboo, so I'm hiding that piece underneath the rope. And as we work our way through these, I'm going to make this look as perfect as possible, and once I'm happy with that piece, I can rotate it around and get it down in front of the pathway. Also adding some of the new zookeeper benches. I really like the look of these. As for netting over the top of the enclosure, I'm using some of the maple pieces, nice sturdy columns, and I'm going to make two peaks to sort of represent the Himalayan mountains. So that metal cable is going to run from the pole to the edge of the enclosure. You can see another pole in the background there. I won't be netting this over, it's just implied, but I think it works out decently well, especially with the new metal cables, which are quite a bit thicker than some of the other ones I've been using in the past. There are our two peaks, and it looks like the Pallas cat enclosure is complete. On the guest side of things, I'm going to line the pathway with some more mossy stones. I totally forgot that you can't just place vendor stalls on the pathway, so I did have to get rid of that afterwards and come up with a different solution, but we will get there eventually. This vendor stall was created for the little pollinator garden that is right in front of the Predator Ridge area. So all I'm doing is swapping out the top part for the new zookeeper marquee pieces. They have a very nice canvas texture to them, and we'll be recoloring them to various different colors just to fit into this area. So lots of reds, oranges, and yellows, and greens in this area to make them fit in with the trees. The pathing, as always, was quite annoying, so moving the stalls around to make sure that they are connected. This was a little bit of a challenge, but we did get there in the end. And because it doesn't look particularly great, I will be having to cover it up with some building pieces. To that end, I ended up using some more mossy stone pieces, and I will just be recoloring those to get as close to the path colors as possible. It creates a nice plaza that people can go into right away as they enter this section. A few more tables down here so that guests can take a rest since they've walked all the way here, and little Asia is ready for its first guest. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for sticking around. Remember to leave a like and a comment. We have a lot of new subscribers recently, but if you're not already, do hit that subscribe button too. And I will see you next time. Bye.